The strange man on the road. I'm a trucker. Been one for years. Driving those long stretches of highway. Hauling freight across the country. Day in, day out. It's the same thing. You get used to the solitude. The hum of the engine. The endless miles. After a while, the road becomes a second home. And you don't think much about the world beyond the cab of your truck. But that night changed everything. It's the kind of thing you don't forget, no matter how much you wish you could. It was just past midnight, and I was making my way through a stretch of road in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where you don't see a soul for miles. The truck was running fine. The radio was barely picking up anything but static. And the headlights cut through the darkness like a knife through black velvet. I had another 2 hours of driving before I'd hit the next town. But the way the night felt, it felt like I could keep driving forever. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was just fatigue starting to settle in. Or maybe it was that feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me something was wrong. I pulled over to the side of the road, my truck grinding to a halt. The engine sputtered, then settled into a low, steady hum. The silence hit me hard, the kind of silence that only happens in the middle of nowhere, where the world seems to hold its breath. I climbed out of the truck, the cold air biting at my skin. I walked around the rig, checked the tires, the load, everything I could think of. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. No flat, no damage. The truck was fine. But there was something that didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the absence of anything. No other vehicles. No lights in the distance. Just the road and the dark. That's when I saw him. I don't know where he came from. He wasn't there a second ago. But there he was, standing in the middle of the road. A man, tall, thin, dressed in what looked like old-fashioned clothes, like something out of a time long past. A faded coat that might have been gray once, now dull and worn. His pants, the kind with suspenders, looked like they belonged to someone who hadn't seen a tailor in decades. His boots were scuffed, and his face was pale, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. He was just standing there, watching me. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe it was just a shadow, some optical illusion. But no. When I squinted and wiped my eyes, he was still there, staring. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I took a step forward, my voice coming out rough from the dryness in my throat. "Hey, you need help?" The man didn't say a word. He just stood there, still, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I took another step closer, but still, no response. It was like he wasn't even acknowledging that I existed. He was just there. Now, I've seen a lot of things over the years on the road. People hitchhiking, drunks stumbling into traffic, crazy drivers, all of it. But something about this guy, it wasn't right. I couldn't explain it. It was like he was waiting for something, but I didn't know what. And there was something about the way he stood, his posture, that felt wrong, like he didn't belong in this world. I was getting nervous now, and I'll admit it. I don't scare easily, but the air around us felt heavy, like the world had paused. The only sound was the rustle of the wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic somewhere far off. I asked again, a little more firmly this time, "Are you all right? Can I help you?" He still didn't speak. He didn't even move. That's when it happened. In a blink, in a flash, he was gone. 1 second he was standing there, and the next, he vanished into thin air. No footsteps, no sound. He was just gone, like he had never been there at all. I stood frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest. I whipped my head around, looking for him, expecting him to reappear. But there was nothing. The road was empty, no sign of him anywhere. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the dark. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I kept telling myself I was just seeing things. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe it was some kind of mirage or a hallucination. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. It had been real, too real. I got back in the truck, my hands shaking as I started the engine. I didn't even bother with the headlights at first. I just drove. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. But as I sped down the road, the thoughts started flooding in. Where had that man come from? What was he doing in the middle of nowhere? Why had he vanished like that? I didn't stop. Not until I reached the next town. Just a small speck on the map. A gas station with a single light flickering overhead. I pulled in, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I parked. I sat there for a moment, my hands still shaking, trying to make sense of everything. I figured I could grab a cup of coffee, stretch my legs, and maybe talk to someone, get some sanity back. But the moment I stepped out of the truck, I saw a sign on the wall of the station. It was an old, weathered sign, barely legible. Dangerous stretch of road, many accidents. Keep alert. I stepped closer, feeling a chill seep into my bones. The sign was just one of those typical warnings you see along highways. But something about it struck me. I looked around, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The gas station attendant saw me staring at the sign and gave me a quick nod. Long stretch of road just past the old mill, he said. Lots of wrecks out there. You'd be better off taking the southern route, if you can. Some folks swear it's haunted. I froze. Haunted? He shrugged, not looking at me. Yeah, some say it's a ghost who appears to drivers. Old stories. But, it's a dangerous road. Accidents happen there all the time. I couldn't breathe for a second. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Though I didn't want them to, I couldn't get the image of that man's pale face out of my head. The way he just stood there, looking at me like he was waiting for something, and then disappeared without a trace. I nodded slowly, trying to hold myself together. Thanks, I muttered. Then, before I could stop myself, I asked, what about the guy? The ghost? What's his story? The attendant finally looked up at me, his face unreadable. Some folks say he was a trucker, got into a bad wreck out there. Years ago, never found his body. Now, they say he waits for drivers to warn them, or maybe just to make them go mad. I could barely hear him, my heart racing as the words settled in my chest. The figure I'd seen, it wasn't just some weird encounter. It was part of something bigger, something I hadn't understood until now. I turned away, unable to look at the attendant any longer. My head was spinning. It wasn't just some random encounter. It was a warning. But what did he want? Why had he appeared to me? The rest of the night passed in a haze. I drove on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I checked my mirrors, I expected to see that shadowy figure again. But he was never there. The road was empty, and yet, I couldn't rid myself of the feeling that I was being watched. I made it home a few hours later, but I wasn't the same. I didn't talk to Lisa about it. Not at first. How could I? She'd never believe me. She'd think I was just tired or imagining things. But the truth is, I know what I saw, and I know there's something out there on those roads. Something waiting for drivers who aren't paying attention. I don't know if it's the ghost of that man or something else, but I've never been the same since that night. The road is a lonely place, but sometimes it feels even lonelier when you know something's out there, watching, waiting. Story number 2. The Hand in the Dark. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in the heartland of America, surrounded by sprawling fields and the steady hum of small-town life, tales of restless spirits and haunted highways seemed like nothing more than old wives' stories meant to entertain or scare children. My name is Jake Turner, and for the past decade, I've been a long-haul truck driver, navigating the endless highways that crisscross the vast, empty expanse of the Midwest. The open road offers a sense of freedom that the confines of a small town never could. A solitary journey where my thoughts are my only companions. But that belief was about to be shattered one fateful night during a drive I'd never forget. It was a typical autumn evening when I decided to take the old Route 66 for a change of scenery. The sun had set hours ago, leaving behind a blanket of darkness punctuated only by the occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars. The air was crisp, the scent of fallen leaves lingering in the breeze as I steered my 18-wheeler down the deserted highway. My rig, a sturdy Freightliner Cascadia, was loaded with essential supplies destined for a remote distribution center in the middle of nowhere. The radio played soft country music, the melodies providing a comforting backdrop to the monotony of the night. As the miles stretched out before me, the isolation of the road settled in. The vast, empty landscape seemed to stretch on endlessly, the darkness swallowing everything in its path. My thoughts drifted to the family waiting for me at the end of the journey. My wife, Lisa, and our 2 kids, Emma and Noah. The thought of them kept me alert, a beacon of light guiding me through the inky blackness. After hours of steady driving, fatigue began to creep in, the rhythmic motion of the truck's engine lulling me toward sleep. I glanced at my clock, 2:17 a.m., and decided it was time for a quick break. I found a secluded rest area just off the highway, a small, empty lot surrounded by towering pines that loomed like silent sentinels in the darkness. The area was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the distant hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves stirred by the night wind. I parked the truck, the tires crunching softly on the gravel as I stepped out, stretching my cramped muscles. The night air was cool against my skin, a welcome contrast to the stuffiness of the cab. I walked over to the restroom, the harsh light flickering above casting long, distorted shadows across the empty lot. The restroom was the only structure here, a small, nondescript building that seemed to merge seamlessly with its surroundings. As I entered, the door squeaked loudly, causing me to jump slightly. The restroom was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead with a faint, persistent hum. I closed the door behind me and took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs. The sound of my own breathing echoed in the small space, the silence pressing in around me. I turned to freshen up, splashing cold water on my face and staring into the mirror. My reflection looked tired, the exhaustion evident in the dark circles under my eyes. I shook my head, trying to dispel the drowsiness that threatened to overtake me. That's when I heard it, a faint, soft tapping sound coming from the far end of the restroom. My heart raced as I listened intently. The sound was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, consistent and deliberate. I glanced around, trying to locate the source, but the restroom was empty except for the sinks and the single stall. The tapping continued, growing slightly louder, a rhythmic pattern that sent chills down my spine. "Hello," I called out, my voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" There was no response, only the continued tapping. I took a tentative step forward, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as I moved toward the source of the sound. As I approached the far end of the restroom, I saw it, a hand, pale and ghostly, gently tapping against the glass of the mirror. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the apparition, the hand moving slowly, almost hesitantly. The reflection in the mirror showed a figure standing behind me, a man, tall and slender, his face obscured by shadows. His presence was unsettling, the air around him thick with an unspoken sorrow that made my skin crawl. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The restroom was empty, the only evidence of his existence the lingering chill that seemed to emanate from the mirror. I backed away slowly, my mind racing to comprehend what I was seeing. "Who are you?" I whispered, fear clawing at my throat. The reflection remained unchanged, the faceless man standing silently, his eyes hollow voids that seemed to reach into my very soul. The tapping ceased, leaving behind an oppressive silence that pressed down on me from all sides. I turned back to the mirror, only to see the image of my own reflection staring back. No sign of the man now. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my racing heart. Shaken, I decided to leave the restroom, my instincts screaming at me to get back to the safety of my truck. As I reached for the door handle, the lights flickered violently, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the icy air as the sense of unease deepened. I grabbed my keys, the metallic clink a sharp contrast to the silent tension that enveloped the space. I hurried out of the restroom, the door swinging open to reveal the empty lot bathed in the harsh light of the restroom's flickering bulb. The night was still, the only movement the sway of the trees outside. I climbed back into the cab, slamming the door shut behind me, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys to start the truck. The engine roared to life, the familiar hum providing a semblance of normalcy amidst the lingering fear. As I drove away from the rest area, the image of the faceless man haunted me, his sorrowful presence lingering in the recesses of my mind. The rest of the journey passed in a blur of shadows and thoughts, the road ahead stretching endlessly into the night. The feeling of being watched never left me, a heavy weight pressing down on my shoulders as I navigated the desolate highway. The following morning, I tried to shake off the night's events, dismissing them as the result of fatigue and stress. But the memory of the apparition lingered, a ghostly reminder of something I couldn't explain. I shared my experience with a few coworkers, expecting skepticism or dismissal, but instead, I was met with nods of understanding. "You know, that rest area has a dark history," one of them said, his voice somber. "There was a tragic accident there about 15 years ago. A trucker lost control of his rig during a storm, crashed into the barriers, and didn't make it out. Some say his spirit still haunts the place, unable to find peace." I felt a chill run down my spine as the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The faceless man, the tapping, the chilling presence. It all pointed to the restless spirit of the deceased trucker, trapped in a cycle of eternal night, forever seeking solace from the tragedy that had claimed his life. Determined to help, I decided to return to the rest area the following night, armed with a deeper understanding of the hauntings. I wanted to honor his memory, to offer a gesture of respect that might finally bring peace to his restless spirit. I gathered some flowers, a small candle, and a notebook, the tools of my newfound mission. That night, as the clock struck midnight once more, I drove back to the secluded rest area, the memory of the previous encounter fueling my resolve. The area was as quiet and desolate as ever, the trees swaying gently in the cool night breeze. I parked my truck and approached the restroom, the faint sound of my own footsteps echoing in the empty lot. I entered the restroom cautiously, the cold air greeting me like an old friend. I set up my small altar by the mirror, placing the flowers and candle in a respectful arrangement. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," I whispered, lighting the candle and offering a silent prayer for his peace. "I hope you can find the rest you deserve." I sat down at the edge of the sink, opening the notebook and beginning to jot down my thoughts, hoping to connect with his spirit in some way. The night was silent once more, the oppressive tension giving way to a calm stillness that felt both comforting and bittersweet. As the minutes ticked by, I felt a presence beside me, a gentle warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill of the night. I glanced up, and there he was, the faceless man, standing silently in the mirror once more. This time, his presence felt different, less menacing and more sorrowful, as if he had finally found a way to communicate his pain. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I'm here to help you find peace." The figure remained still, his hollow eyes meeting mine with an intensity that spoke volumes. Slowly, the edges of his form began to shimmer, the darkness surrounding him lifting like morning mist. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, the oppressive presence dissipating as his spirit began to fade. "Peace." His presence seemed to echo, the word lingering in the air long after he had vanished. I sat there for a long moment, absorbing the profound sense of closure that had finally settled over the rest area. The following night, I returned to the rest area, expecting to find nothing but the echoes of the past. But as I approached the restroom, I saw the chair once again, a simple, unassuming stool by the sink, now perfectly still and untouched. The lights above flickered gently, casting a warm glow that seemed to welcome rather than threaten. I smiled, a sense of accomplishment and peace settling in my heart. The restless spirit had found his peace. His story no longer a haunting echo but a silent memory etched into the fabric of the night. In the weeks that followed, the hauntings ceased, the rest area returning to its peaceful, quiet state. I continued my night shifts with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that some encounters transcend the boundaries of life and death, offering a chance to bridge the gap between the living and the departed. But sometimes, late at night, when the road stretches out endlessly before me and the darkness presses in from all sides, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow, a soft whisper, reminding me that the echoes of the past never truly fade. The road remains a place of solitude and reflection, where the lines between reality and the supernatural blur in the stillness of the night. So, if you ever find yourself driving through a deserted stretch of highway on a cold, lonely night, keep an eye out for the shadows that dance just beyond the reach of your headlights. Respect the stories of those who have lost their way. Honor their memories, and understand that some spirits seek only acknowledgement to finally rest in peace. For in the heart of the night, the echoes of the lost linger, forever watching, forever remembering. Story number 3. Shadow on the Road. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in the heartland of America, surrounded by vast plains and the endless stretch of highways, tales of restless spirits and haunted roads seemed like nothing more than old wives' stories meant to scare children or entertain the superstitious. My name is Tom Harris, and for the past 8 years, I've been a long-haul truck driver, navigating the country's sprawling interstate system in my trusty 18-wheeler. The open road offers a sense of freedom that the confines of a small town never could, a solitary journey where my thoughts are my only companions. But one fateful night shattered my skepticism and plunged me into a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was a chilly October evening, the kind where the air carries a crisp bite and the scent of fallen leaves lingers in the breeze. I was hauling a load of electronics from Chicago to Dallas, a trip that usually took about 24 hours. I had planned to make good time, eager to reach home before dawn and reunite with my wife, Lisa, and our 2 kids, Emma and Noah. The highway was nearly empty, the only light coming from the moon and the occasional car passing by. The rhythmic hum of the engine and the steady pace of the road lulled me into a relaxed state, my mind drifting between the endless miles and the memories of home. As midnight approached, I felt a growing sense of fatigue, the exhaustion of the long drive weighing heavily on me. I glanced at my rearview mirror, the glow of dashboard lights reflecting in my tired eyes. That's when I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, directly behind my truck. At first, I thought it was another trucker taking a break, but as I slowed down, the figure remained motionless, staring intently at me through the darkened windows. My heart began to race, a mix of fear and curiosity battling within me. I increased my speed slightly, hoping the figure would move on, but it didn't. Instead, the shadow seemed to grow darker, blending seamlessly with the night until it was almost indistinguishable from the darkness itself. I reached for the radio, trying to distract myself with some music, but static filled the speakers, drowning out the country ballad I'd been listening to moments before. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every time I glanced at the mirror, the shadow remained, seemingly tethered to my truck, moving in sync with my every turn. The oppressive weight of being watched pressed down on me, my mind racing with possibilities: accident, prank, or something far more sinister. Deciding I couldn't continue driving with this unnerving presence, I pulled over at the next rest area, a desolate spot surrounded by tall, swaying pines. The lot was empty, save for a few distant headlights that faded as I approached. I parked my truck, the engine ticking softly as I shut it off. Stepping out into the cold night air, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I walked around to the back of the truck, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. There was no one in sight, no trucker, no shadow. The darkness was complete, swallowing any sign of movement. I glanced back at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadow standing there. But the mirror reflected only the empty road behind me. Shaking off the fear, I decided to inspect the area, walking slowly around my truck. The eerie silence was broken only by the distant call of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I reached the edge of the lot, the asphalt stretching out into nothingness, the horizon lost in the inky blackness of the night. As I stood there, contemplating my next move, a sudden gust of wind swept through the area, rustling the trees and sending a chill down my spine. I turned back to my truck, the rearview mirror reflecting my own weary face. For a moment, everything seemed normal, the shadow absent. Relieved, I reached to unlock the truck, ready to continue my journey home. But then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping sound coming from the rear of the truck. My heart pounded as I glanced back at the mirror, half expecting to see the shadow once more. Instead, I saw a faint imprint of a hand pressed against the glass, leaving behind a smeared residue that seemed to distort the reflection. Fear surged through me as I stepped back, my mind racing with questions. Who or what had been standing behind my truck? Was it real, or just a figment of my exhausted imagination? I tried to rationalize the experience, telling myself it must have been a trick of the light or a fleeting shadow. But the image of the hand pressed against the mirror lingered, a haunting reminder of the encounter. Deciding I had to get back on the road, I climbed into the cab, the familiar scent of leather and diesel providing a small comfort. As I started the engine, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, the air inside the truck growing cold and unwelcoming. The dashboard lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows across my face. I reached for the radio again, but this time, the static was louder, more intense, drowning out any attempt at distraction. As I pulled back onto the highway, the sense of unease followed me, a constant presence that made every mile feel like an eternity. I tried to focus on the road, my eyes darting between the headlights and the mirror, searching for any sign of movement. The highway seemed to stretch on endlessly, the darkness enveloping me like a shroud. Halfway through the night, as dawn began to hint at the horizon, I felt the need to take another break. I found a small, deserted rest stop, a forgotten spot with a single gas pump and a dilapidated restroom building. The area was silent, the only sound the distant call of a lone coyote and the gentle rustling of leaves. I parked my truck, the engine ticking softly as I shut it off. Stepping out into the cool morning air, I felt a momentary sense of relief, the oppressive weight of the night's events lifting slightly. I walked toward the restroom, deciding to freshen up before the final stretch of my journey. As I approached the building, I heard the soft, rhythmic tapping again, echoing through the empty lot. My heart raced as I turned around, half expecting to see the shadow standing there once more. But the area remained empty, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees and casting a warm glow on the deserted rest stop. I entered the restroom cautiously, the cool air greeting me like an old friend. The fluorescent lights flickered above, casting long shadows that danced across the tiled floors. I approached the mirror, reaching for the paper towel dispenser to dry my hands, when I saw a dark, indistinct figure standing directly behind me, his presence cold and menacing. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was no one there. The restroom was empty, the door locked from the outside as if held by an unseen force. Panic surged through me as I tried to calm myself, but the fear was overwhelming. I glanced back at the mirror, and there he was, the shadowy figure, now more defined, his eyes hollow voids that seemed to stare into my very soul. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The figure didn't respond. Instead, he began to move forward, his form shifting and darkening, blending seamlessly with the shadows of the restroom. I took a step back, the door to the restroom glowing with an unnatural light, beckoning me to leave, desperate to escape. I turned to unlock the door, but my hands trembled uncontrollably. the keys slipping from my grasp and falling to the floor with a clink. The figure continued to approach, the temperature dropping further as his presence filled the room with an oppressive chill. In a moment of sheer panic, I dashed toward the door, slamming it open and sprinting back to my truck. I didn't stop until I was safely behind the wheel, my hands shaking as I tried to steady my breath. The shadow had vanished, leaving behind only the lingering sense of dread that clung to me like a second skin. I started the engine and sped away, the rest stop disappearing into the distance as the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon. The road ahead stretched out endlessly, the darkness giving way to the promise of a new day. But the fear remained, a constant reminder of the night's terrifying events. When I finally reached home, the sight of my wife and kids waiting for me brought a surge of relief and joy. But as I embraced them, I couldn't shake the memory of the shadow and the cold touch of fear that had accompanied me all night. I told them about the rest stop and the figure in the restroom, watching their faces turn pale with concern. The next day, I couldn't let go of what had happened. Determined to understand the source of the haunting, I returned to Horizon Supermarket, the same place where the shadow had first appeared. I spoke with a few of the longtime employees, hoping to uncover any hidden histories or forgotten tragedies. One evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened across the parking lot, an elderly janitor named Joe approached me, his expression somber. "You know, Jake," he began slowly, "that rest stop has a dark history. Years ago, there was a terrible accident involving a trucker who lost control on that very stretch of road. He crashed into the barriers, and his rig ended up blocking the highway. There were no survivors." I felt a chill run down my spine as the pieces began to fit together. The shadow, the tapping, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed to the restless spirit of that trucker, forever tied to the road where his life had been tragically cut short. Joe continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "They say his spirit can't move on, forever stuck between the living and the dead, seeking solace or perhaps vengeance. Some folks around here believe he appears to other truckers, warning them of the dangers that lie ahead or trying to make them remember the fragility of life." Determined to help the restless spirit find peace, I decided to return to the rest stop one final time, armed with knowledge and a sense of purpose. That night, as darkness settled over the highway, I parked my truck at the same spot, the memories of the previous encounters fueling my resolve. I stepped out into the cool night air, the rest stop eerily quiet as I approached the restroom. The lights flickered above, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with each step I took. I entered the building, the soft tapping sound returning, guiding me to the same spot where I had faced the shadow. "I'm sorry for what happened," I whispered, my voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. "I want to help you find peace." The room was cold, the air thick with the presence of something unseen. I placed a bouquet of flowers on the sink, the scent of fresh blooms a stark contrast to the lingering chill. "You're not alone," I continued. "Your story won't be forgotten." I sat down at the edge of the sink, closing my eyes and offering a silent prayer for the lost soul. For a moment, nothing happened, the silence pressing in around me. Then, the shadow appeared once more, standing at the far end of the room, his presence less menacing and more sorrowful. "Thank you." The words echoed in my mind, a gentle whisper carried by the wind. The figure began to fade, his form dissolving into the darkness as if he had finally found the closure he so desperately sought. As the last traces of his presence vanished, a sense of calm washed over the room, the oppressive weight lifting like morning fog. The rest stop felt warmer, the shadows receding as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. I left the restroom with a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that I had played a part in helping a restless spirit find peace. The shadow no longer haunted me, his presence replaced by a serene calm that seemed to embrace the road ahead. In the weeks that followed, the highway felt different, less lonely, less foreboding. The encounters with the shadow had ceased, replaced by a sense of tranquility that allowed me to focus on my journey home. The memory of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead and the lingering echoes of those who never found peace. But sometimes, late at night, as I drive through other stretches of deserted highways, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, a lingering respect for the spirit of the lost trucker reminding me of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. The memory of the shadow serves as a constant reminder to honor the stories of those who have lost their way, ensuring that their legacies live on amidst the shadows and miles of road. So, if you ever find yourself driving down a secluded highway on a cold night, surrounded by the silent expanse and enveloped in darkness, listen closely to the whispers carried by the wind. Respect the stories of those who have lost their way. Honor their memories, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the wilderness, the echoes of the lost still roam, forever searching for peace amidst the shadows and miles of road.